Would you like the honor of hitting the giant record button?
This one here?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, cool. Here we go. All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of David's Saturday Night Sit Back. Tonight, sitting across from me, I got Stephanie Sharp, who is a strategic leader, relationship builder, and problem solver. She was the vice president at Sage Advisory before moving into business development strategist role with Transamerica. She started her journey getting her international business and marketing degree through the University of Colorado Boulder, and along the way became a Series 6, 63, and 65 licensed. Her passions include the National Charity League, Lake Travis Chapter, the Young Men's Service League, and Keystone APG. Her health and fitness is a huge part of her life as she's an active member of CrossFit Lake Travis. Stephanie and I met after you sent me a message on Instagram after you finished listening to your son, Jackson Scruggs' episode and had the kindest things to say. So thank you so much for that. We jumped on a phone call and I thought that her life as a mother while also staying active in the world of business and the world of fitness and now learning that you have a super energetic dog that you also take care of, I thought you would just make the perfect guest for this show. So Stephanie, welcome to your episode of DSNSB.
Thank you. Nice to be here, David.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Of course.
So I have three questions that I found from this list of 100 icebreaker questions that I thought were sort of fun that we could kick things off with before we get down to the nitty gritty.
Okay.
The first one was, if you were to live to the age of 90 and retain either the mind or body of a 30-year-old for the last 60 years of your life, which would you want?
Either or.
Yep.
Gosh. You have to pick one or the other?
Yeah.
If I have the body of a 30-year-old, I don't know when I die then, correct?
Well, the question says you're going to die at 90.
Oh.
So you do know when you're going to die.
Okay. So what is the thing I have to choose from? Having the body of a 30-year-old forever?
Or the mind of a 30-year-old.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, good grief. I don't know. I feel like the experiences I have had in my life have been helpful. There's a little bit of wisdom there, a lot of trial and tribulation, I suppose. So I think I'd maybe opt for the body of a 30-year-old.
Keep moving.
That's right. And I'm okay with my brain can be older though, right?
Your brain would be, yeah.
Older. Okay, yeah. Sure. It'd be nice to take a little step back.
But I guess, if you want to break away from the question, like, there's things we can do to keep our brain active, good night's sleep and reading or multiple things.
Yes.
I think the ideal thing, my grandpa, one thing I really admire about him is I'm pretty sure he worked up until like a couple of days before he passed away. Mm-hmm. He fainted one day, spent about 48, maybe 72 hours in the hospital and very peacefully passed. And I thought, what a cool life to be physically active and mentally active and then very peacefully go over just a short period.
Yeah, not drawn out and painful. That sounds pretty nice to me as well.
Yeah. So I'm aspiring to be like you in that sense, Grandpa, to the best that I...
Well, I mean, that's one of my major motivations for trying to stay in shape is because I don't want to be told I can't do things, and I don't really want my body to limit me in doing things. And I think you kind of take it for granted until you can't do it anymore, and you never know when that might come. So you have to do the best job you can, taking care of it on a day-to-day basis, right?
When there's so many different forms of exercise, you got like Zumba, yoga, I guess you could say traditional weightlifting or cardio. How did you choose that CrossFit, at least in your current phase of life, is the right mode of working out for you?
Sure. So just to be clear, I only do CrossFit twice a week.
Okay.
It is probably some of my most fun that I have for exercise per week, but I try as consistently as possible to work out at least an hour 5 days a week, and that looks different depending on the day. 2 of those days are for CrossFit. 2 of those days I'm in the gym at HCI, which is close to where you go to the gym, but not right there. I don't know if you've checked that one out,
Not
but
yet.
it's a beautiful facility if you ever want to go as a guest. And then Sundays are reserved for my version of church, which is we go down to the hike and bike trail and run down there. And I say we, that's myself and one of my very best friends, nearest and dearest, oldest friends, Karen, who has been my training partner off and on since, I think, like 1999. Which is a terrifying length of time to say that, but actually I'm proud of it too. So,
Yeah.
and we run, and that's kind of one of the things, if I can crank out 5 miles without too big of a problem, that's a big, badge of honor for me. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how my 5 days breaks up. And how did I get into CrossFit? Honestly, I went through a time period where I was not going to the gym anymore, and I was just doing, I was just running. So lots of cardio, predominantly running. And it kind of, I'm trying to remember, I've been doing CrossFit for about 10 years. And I knew especially with women, as you age, you begin to lose muscle mass, and that I think it's I forgot what the number is, if it's 4% per decade or 4% per year. I hope it's not per year, because I would be
That'd
like
be
a skeleton.
fast.
I know,
Right.
terrible.
Let's go with the
Can't be per
decade.
year. Yeah, that would make more sense, but it might be more than 4%. I knew that running wasn't going to be enough, right?
Yeah.
And we all know runners who are kind of like skinny fat, where they look really great, but they don't have a ton of strength, and they don't have the best bone density and things like that. And for me, the way, I forgot what kind of body shape or style I have, like mesomorphic or whatever it is, but
Sure.
kind of in between there. I have a greater degree of muscle mass than a lot of women that are my height. And so in order to keep my metabolism running the way I needed it to run, I wanted to maintain as much of that muscle as possible. But also the strength component is a big thing for me. I like feeling strong. I like being able to move furniture if I need to, or I don't know, like carry my own suitcase,
Right.
put it above in the overhead compartment when I travel. And I just don't want to be limited. If I want to do something, I want to go do it. And a lot of the time, you have to keep your back healthy and all that stuff too. So, but that's not really why I love CrossFit. The CrossFit for me is about the camaraderie. And at our box, I'm one of a lot of folks that have been doing it since they opened almost. And the owners, who I think you are hopefully going to meet sometime, they recently took over, but were longtime members before that, and both very accomplished athletes, but also wonderful human beings. And they both have very respected professional careers on top of being business owners too. So
That's cool.
but I used to be part of this really early morning class, 5:15 a.m.
Ooh.
And I think they called us the Rooster Crew, and we would go, and there was, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them, and of us, and you're done by 6:15 in the morning, and it's pretty awesome. Great way to start your day. And I did that for the longest time, and then in 2021, I went on a cruise for 2 weeks. I came back, and for some reason, I have never been able to get back to 5:15. So now I go to the 6:30 class, and I feel a little bit like a slacker. And my 5:15 buddies who I pass on the way out, they're like, "Yeah, why aren't you going anymore?" They stopped asking after it's been a couple of years now. But so 6:30 is the concession, and that's the Breakfast Club, we're called. So that's a little better. But
It's a good movie.
yeah, it's a fantastic movie. So anyway, getting up at 4:40 in the morning is just too much anymore.
That sounds like I feel like a slacker for waking. My alarm clock is set for when you're arriving at the gym. So, but I've also never been a morning person.
Yeah.
I could work on whatever, my day job, the podcast, until 1 a.m. and be fine the next day. But ask me to get up at 4:40, I'm like,
Yeah. Well, I don't know many people who do that naturally, David, so you're not alone there. I'm not a great sleeper. I've never been a great sleeper. My mom and dad used to tell me all the time about how bad of a sleeper I was as a child. So I have a pretty serious case of FOMO. So, and it seems to have transcended into my adult life. But as soon as my brain turns on in the morning, I'm ready to go. So, and Jackson kind of is that way a little. He's an early bird too, for the most part. But he's much more disciplined about getting the rest that he needs than I am. So,
can you tell me? Would you mind retelling the story about your discovery with your Apple Watch?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember. I don't know if it's funny or not, but so my husband works for Apple, and so we are blessed with that lovely. It's a decent discount. It's not as dramatic as you might think, but so we have a lot of cool tech in our house. He's always happy to help anybody get new Apple products because he's such a firm believer in all of it. And for the longest time, he bought me an Apple Watch, I think 2 different times, and I made him send it back because I was like, I really don't need to be micromanaging more of my own day-to-day than I already do. I'm a little OCD about some things already, and I'm saying that sarcastically. I'm not really OCD, but you get kind of focused on your metrics and your numbers, whether it's your maxes or whatever.
Yeah.
And Karen, my running partner, had one, and she had been a big proponent of, like, there's this great sleep app that goes with it that tracks your sleep, tracks your HRV, your deep sleep, your REM sleep, et cetera, and you can really kind of hone in on the good and bad parts of your sleep pattern. And so I was like, okay, fine. So I finally, I guess 2 years ago, I said, all right, I want one for my birthday. And so my husband got me one, and she helped me set it up, and we got it all good to go. And I still wear it to this day, but I used to wear it pretty much 24/7, except when it was charging, and I would sleep with it. And then there's a phone app that goes along with it that I think it's a one-time charge. It's called Auto Sleep, and it's pretty cool. And it shows you when you go to sleep at night what your sleep cycles are. And I noticed that it just confirmed what I already knew, that I'm a bad sleeper and I don't get enough sleep. And the thing that was probably the most disturbing to me was, I like to enjoy an adult beverage here and there, and as little as one single solitary alcoholic beverage would completely derail my REM sleep for me personally. And so even on nights when I wasn't drinking, I would sometimes struggle with the REM sleep piece and always kind of felt like I was behind. And there's only so much you can do about that. And it just kind of caused me to say, you know what, recently, I think it was a few months ago, we were talking, and I said, I'm going to kind of give it a whirl without the sleep app monitoring at night.
Yep.
And so I stopped wearing the watch, and I kind of feel like I sleep a little bit better now, maybe because I'm not being monitored. I don't know. It might just be an illusion. It could. I'm not sure, but
right.
I feel a tiny bit more well rested, and maybe it's because when you look at the app the next morning to see how much REM sleep you get, which is the very most important part, and not knowing whether or not I got it or not isn't going to mess up my day.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like some people struggle when they get on the scale in the morning and they're like, oh my gosh, and it sets the tone for their day. It wasn't really that dramatic for me, but it definitely had an impact. So
and again, this is, like you said, this is just your data, so we're not projecting this onto everybody.
Yep.
But do you happen to recall on those nights when you did have even just one glass of wine or one whatever it was, what would the report say? Just that you never slipped into that REM cycle at all?
Yeah, it would have multi-layered graph, right? And it would show when you went to sleep, and your cycles are kind of these I'll show it to you later on, but and it would overlay it with your periods of REM sleep, and basically I would get 0. You're supposed to get a minimum of about 1.5 to 3 hours a night, and in some cases I would get 0. And I was, and I didn't remember particularly tossing and turning with it, but I mean, it reinforces all that you hear about alcohol consumption and sleep and how it really is disruptive, and it might help you get off to sleep, but then I think it's the sugar metabolizing and that kind of stuff that really messes up with your sleep cycle. So I don't know.
Do you mind if I ask what time you go to bed normally?
Yes, I'm not a good sleep patient. About 11, that's my usual bedtime, which I should be. I start the whole process, I start talking about it around 10 o'clock, but then I don't really I'm like, okay, I got to go to bed soon. And my husband's like, all right, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
And then I'll kind of give him the warning, and then I'll say, okay, now I'm going to go to bed. And sometimes he stays up, and sometimes he goes to bed at the same time. And then by the time I'm, brush my teeth and lay down and all that, and I do a little tiny bit of reading, which should be more so in a book, not on my phone. I know that's a no-no as well. And I usually kind of turn off the light, and it's 11, and get up at 5:45 most mornings. So,
Do you feel like you fall asleep pretty quick?
oh, I felt like this, like
Oh, that's cool.
immediately.
That's
Yes.
great.
That is not my problem.
I don't have that. I'm very jealous.
Oh, really? Well, but
Yeah.
I wake up in anticipation of my alarm clock going off. So if I wake up at 5:45, usually, or if my alarm is set for that, I usually wake up 5:15, 5:20, 5:25, and that gets a little frustrating because you're like, I just want to keep sleeping.
Yeah.
And, so you kind of get one end of the deal or the other, I guess.
My Sundays are my one day with no alarm, and I woke up this last Sunday. I woke up at 4:30, and then I woke back up again
Wow,
at 5:30, and so then at 5:30, you ever woken up? It sounds like you might be like this every day. I don't often wake up and I feel wide awake. It usually takes anywhere from like 10 minutes to 40. I need to roll out of bed, get some coffee, and I'll walk the dog. And I try to make that our habit during the weekdays. But it was very weird for me to just wake up at 4:30 a.m. on a Sunday, was able to fall back asleep, had some really funky dreams. One was about my rental car was falling apart on the way to the airport. Like, I literally saw the bumper fall off in the dream, and I was like, I'm not even traveling anytime soon. Why is this nightmare happening? So then I woke up at 5:30, and my mind felt like it was fully alert already. So I thought, great, Sunday, we're going to get started an hour earlier than my weekdays. This is
You're
awful.
gonna kill it. That's your new routine. Get up earlier without an alarm on Sunday. Yeah, sometimes Saturday is that day for me. And I don't know. I rarely am able to sleep in. I think I did this last Saturday because I didn't really have anything until much later in the day. And I think I woke up at, I'm trying to remember, right before 8. But the problem is I stayed up the night before too. So I was up till after midnight, right? But I mean, not a big deal. I'm a grown up. I can handle it. But when I wake up in the morning, I'm pretty much let's go. Because part of me is like, I have this kind of mental checklist. Like I gotta go, I get up, I get, go to the restroom, get ready, I put my workout clothes out the night before because it's just too easy. And if my husband's there, I don't want to wake him up. And so I put it in the bathroom, I get ready, and then take my big water jug with me to the gym and out the door by, 6:10. See my buddies at the gym, do my thing, get home, walk the dog for, seems like an eternity sometimes, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And then I come back, I get cleaned up and start my work day. And it's a little bit later than I'd like for it to be. That's been a COVID kind of schedule creep thing too.
Yeah.
I wish I started earlier, but I do work later. And that's another, so my life has changed quite a bit in the last few years, having an almost empty nest now. I mean, we went from having 5 kiddos at home to an empty nest over the span of like 4 years.
That's fast. Or
Yeah, it's
it
pretty
sounds
quick.
fast anyways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pretty quick. And so I think part of my kind of like up and let's go is because I was always trying to make sure people are getting out the door for practices in the morning or getting their breakfast or, what other sundry stuff do you have to have together in order to start your day properly, kid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which one, or multiple, sometimes driving them to school or practice or whatever it is early on, and then also having to deal with all the other responsibilities. So, when my brain kicks on in the morning, it's like going through this like computer generated list of all these things that have to be done.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get out of that. I have over time, but I feel like things are much easier now.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yay.
Do you, when did the 5th one leave? Do you happen to recall what?
So the 5th one is actually 2. Jackson, who you met, and his twin brother, they're twins, and they graduated from high school in 2021. And Jackson's a junior in college now, and Jordan is he's decided to go straight to the professional world, and he's a recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports, covering the University of Texas, so for football.
Recruiting analyst.
Yeah.
The recruiter in me just hears the word recruiting, and I'm like, oh, what does he do?
That kind of recruiting.
So is he analyzing how the recruiting efforts are going, and then like giving suggestions on how to improve the process?
Well, so he works for 24/7. He doesn't work for UT, but he's covering UT. And so this is my limited mom, not Longhorn fan perspective. So please, if there's anybody out there, please don't judge me, especially my son. My understanding is, and he's kind of evolved into this role, he was covering Baylor before, and that was more on a more limited basis. And then when this spot opened up, because he's become very good friends, he's been a phenomenal networker in terms of understanding that space. So when this opening came up, it was kind of his dream job, and he had made the right connections. And so they were like, we want you, you're coming into this role. And so if all goes well over time, he'll be picked up by CBS, who's the parent company of 24/7. And
Gotcha.
A lot of what he does is following the recruiting class, the incoming recruiting class. So who the best Texas high school football players are, who Texas has their eye on, how they're rated, some of the shenanigans that they do or don't get up to, following all the events they have, like the spring game and the combines that they have.
Interesting.
Which other schools they're being recruited by. I mean, in a lot of all of what he's seeing and experiencing and commenting on goes into social media. So big on Twitter/X, I think to a lesser extent Instagram, and he writes articles and things like that. There are some requirements he's got, but I mean, it's basically making sure that the fandom that's out there for UT, which as you can imagine is enormous, is properly updated on all the cool recruiting stuff. So
Sounds fun.
that's my
If you're into sports.
limited knowledge.
Yeah. No, that was well said. Well said.
Thanks.
So going back on your own experience as a kid before we deep dive too much more
Sure.
into your family, where were you born?
Where was I born? I was born in Montreal, Canada.
Really?
Actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How many years were until your first move out of Montreal?
Let's see. Oh, I guess three and a half, because my sister was born in Toronto, and she's 3.5 years younger than me. And so we went from Montreal to Toronto, and then to Buffalo, New York, followed by Miami. And then from Miami over to England for a couple years. I was there for 8th and 9th grade, and then
England, Europe, or England, Northern?
England, Europe. Yeah,
Okay.
not New England, England.
Sorry, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Yeah,
England, Europe.
The United Kingdom.
Okay,
Where
cool.
they speak a little differently. So we were there for 2 years, and then my dad's company. He was working for a big pharmaceutical company at the time, and they brought him back to headquarters, which is in Chicago, which is where I finished high school. Then I went to the University of Colorado from there, and from there I came to Austin.
Cool.
So, yeah.
So how do you remember was it cool being able to see all these places? Was it incredibly frustrating when you were a kid, to the best of your memory? What was that like, just bouncing around like all these dramatically different spots?
Yeah, that's a good question, and something I've thought about a lot as a parent now, and also growing up. So there are pros and cons, as there are to any family situation. I would say pros were that I'm pretty chameleon-like in that I can adapt to pretty much any type of situation. I think I moved every 2.5, 3 years growing up, and I went to 2 middle schools, 2 high schools, 2 elementary schools. We got to see an enormous amount of things being kids, and my parents took us to a lot of different places. We got to travel a lot on the weekend when we lived in Europe. Experienced some things that virtually nobody that in my peer group ever experienced, unless their parents were in a similar industry or perhaps in the military or oil and gas, those kind of, or government, right? Those kind of industries and segments of the professional world have a lot of that in common. So that was good. I mean, and it gave me a lot of perspective. I mean, as I mentioned earlier today, Nikita, one of your last guests, he was talking about the benefits of travel, and I could not agree more, because there's such a world outside of Texas, outside of the United States, and I think the more you can expose yourself to and the more experiences you can have and be sensitive to other cultures and histories and things of that nature, that it really kind of informs your life and also helps you understand how truly good we have it here in the U.S. I mean, honestly. Some of the bad things were, growing up, my dad's career was number one, and everybody else was secondary, pretty much. And, the party line was, it's a sacrifice for the future, and pack up your shit and let's go. We're not crying about it. This is what's happening. And, so it was sometimes hard. It was hard to carry on relationships or to keep those friendships going when you're a child, in long distance. I mean, they were pretty supportive about us traveling to go see friends and former friends and things like that. Maybe, I don't know, my sister may or may not agree with me, but I think you end up trusting people maybe earlier than you should in some cases, because you're trying to form bonds and you're new in a situation, right?
Yeah.
One of the other things that was hard for me, to a lesser extent as an adult, and I'm still very good friends with a lot of those people, is that, I think back to high school, and when I came in as a sophomore in high school in Chicago, I grew up finished high school in the North Shore, which is a really nice area, and kind of John Hughes movie, right? Like
okay.
all the John Hughes movies are filmed in the North Shore of Chicago. So that was my growing up in the same era too. And these kids, I got dropped in my sophomore year in high school, and these kids had all grown up together. They were in church pre-K together, kindergarten, Catholic elementary school together, junior high, senior high, whatever. And so they were kind of like, who are you? And so I got involved in sports, and that was helpful, and kind of became, teammates with a lot of them. And I wasn't in one particular social group over another. I kind of floated amongst a handful of them, but I have a couple really good friends from high school. I have handful of really good friends from college, and I am very, very blessed in that regard. So
it's funny that you brought up the who are you concept, because I remember in high school, my freshman, sophomore, and junior year specifically, that I don't know if someone in my circle of friends had a parent that worked in the admin office, but somehow we always found out, and it's oh, there's a new person, and her name's Stephanie. She's going to be on campus today. And it was very exciting for us to who's the stranger? No, not stranger, but it was also just such a small school. It was my I didn't graduate from there, but each graduating class was under 100 people.
Oh,
so
wow.
I think when you threw someone new into the mix, it was very excited. Oh, these people are all boring. We know all about them.
Yeah, we already know their story. What's
right.
this new shiny person?
Coming from Chicago, and we know nothing about them, and now they're in Northern California. So do you think that, you mentioned your friend that you run with, Karen?
Yes.
Do you think that because you moved around so many times, you almost became a master relationship builder through that in a way, because you got so much trial and error on how to invade friend groups, not invade, but you almost, you kept, it was almost like you could have, reinvented yourself 10 different times to sort of figure out who is Stephanie and who do I want to be and what am I going to add to this friend group. And I wonder if that could have been one of the positives, is just your ability to build relationships.
I would say yes, to a certain degree, right? When you come in as the outsider, though, that's not always easy, right? I mean, unless somebody kind of brings you into the group, it's tough. It's tough to kind of stand on the outside and be like, hey, excuse me, can I hang out with you guys? Can I come to your sleepover tonight? That kind of thing.
Sure.
You obviously have to be kind of brought into the fold. Karen and I, we were neighbors at first and she was a seasoned veteran and already had 2 little kiddos very early on. And so when I had my first, who's Jackson's older sister, it's her birthday today. She's 24 years old.
Sydney?
Yes.
Happy birthday, Sydney.
Happy birthday, Sydney.
Happy birthday.
Yes. She's going to yell at me later for saying this, but that's okay. You know, Karen was a great touchstone for me, and we were contemporaries, but, you know, we did a lot together in that cul-de-sac and had a great time. But I feel like one of the, kind of to your point about, was I a good infiltrator of friend groups? I don't know so much that, but I'm very good at like observing and kind of figuring people out fairly quickly, and what people, I'm not going to say agendas are, but kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think we talked about it on the phone, you know, whether you sit at a dinner table at somebody's family dinner, or you are at a boardroom table or at a committee, which we have to do quite a bit in my professional life, where you have to kind of sit around and talk to multiple decision makers. All of their, I guess, issues or kind of things that they have are on their sleeve if you have the ability to see them, right? Yeah. The person who has to talk the most in the room, the person who has to be the smartest person in the room, the person who acts like the victim, the person, I mean, there's a whole cast of characters in pretty much any dynamic there, right? I'm sure you see it in recruiting.
Yep.
You have to be a pretty good judge of character pretty quickly. So that was a skill that I learned over time, just kind of sitting back and watching. And kind of goes counter to my personality because I'm pretty outgoing, but where it did come in handy, and I'll tell you, and I think I wrote my college entrance essay about this. It was, I don't know, I think the prompt or something, it was something to the effect of share a time in your life where something didn't go the way you wanted or something like that, and how you came out of it for the better or something similar to that. And I remember living in England, and granted, this is a country where they speak the same language, right? So that you don't have a communication barrier per se, but England is very class-oriented and very, they kind of discriminate based on appearances, and there's a lot of assumptions, almost to a greater extent than there is here in the U.S. And as a kid, I mean, I went there when I was in 8th grade and 9th grade. I remember riding on the tube, which is the London Underground, the subway there, and being able to like just sit back and watch other people, and being able to pick out who the Americans were based on their behavior and what they wore and things like that. But also the other thing that was frustrating for me was that people would hear me speak with an American accent, and they would make all sorts of assumptions about you, where you come from, how much money you have or didn't have, and what have you. And then also where you lived, right? That was a big status kind of differentiator. And I didn't really care for that. I was more interested in being judged for my character or integrity or what have you. And so anyway, I experienced, you know, mild discrimination at a pretty young age, and it helped me to, you know, don't make assumptions about people, because you really don't know, you know, until you get to know them. So.
Yeah. You threw off my train of thought a little bit because
sorry.
No, not you. I should have reworded that. But there's a guest named Hedaya on the show, and by all appearances, she looks white, but she's from Morocco. So
wow.
If you don't know her name and you haven't heard her speak, you don't. She went through very similar things. She didn't move to Austin. She lived in a different city, more towards the East Coast, but she said that was a very strange thing about trying to integrate to America, was getting used to people sort of turning their heads real quick as soon as she started speaking, and then a few nasty comments in there too, and for the most part positive, but she's just like, I had to get used to that people just assume that because of my skin color and how I dress, I'm an American, and then they hear that my name's Hedaya and they hear me talk and they're like, oh, you're very much not from here at all. But she's rocking and rolling now. She's a powerhouse.
It's awesome.
So you went to college, University of Boulder, Colorado. How did you decide on wanting to do, it was a business and marketing mix, right?
International business and marketing, double major in the business school. And how did I decide to pick that major?
Yeah.
This isn't really a story that I'm, I don't know, proud is not the right word. It was a little weird. It ended up working out wonderfully. But growing up, I'm the oldest of two girls, and my sister is 3.5 years younger than me. And as I mentioned, my dad was a high-ranking pharmaceutical industry executive and very domineering, pretty much called all the shots in the family. And I remember when I got in, I applied to, I don't know, back then we didn't apply to 20 schools, we applied to like 5, and they were like, apply to 5, we'll visit 3, and one of them better be Indiana University, which is where both my parents went and met. And I was like, I don't want to go to school there. And so fortunately it was not a problem, but when I went to CU, I was blown away. Everybody's super friendly. It is one of the most breathtaking college campuses in the nation. I'm so grateful that my daughter and my stepson both ended up going to CU also to carry on our little tiny legacy. But and it's my happy place. Boulder is, and it's just gorgeous there. So we sat down when I decided I wanted to go to school there, and I was admitted. And back then, you didn't have to get accepted into a specific college within the university at that time, and that's the way it is now because it's much more competitive. But same thing with UT and a lot of the other really good schools. And my entire life up until that point was devoted to becoming a veterinarian. And
interesting.
I took a lot of science classes and a lot of, I worked at a vet. It was my very first job. I had to get a work permit because I was only like 14 at the time. And I would go in there on the weekends and, play with the animals. And anyway, that's a whole nother podcast talking about some of the stuff that happened there. But let's just say, those giant industrial buffers, that was definitely a learning experience for me. Terrifying, but I got it eventually. Anyway, so we sat down to pick my major, and I had decent grades in high school. My kids have all been better students than me, but I will say it's not because of aptitude, and I'm not going to blame my parents here, but I'm probably potential. I had more potential, but we moved around so much that I didn't have a lot of continuity with my education. And so where I would be advanced in math in one school, I went to the American Community School outside of London, and they were not impressed with my math skills coming from Miami. And, I just remember freshman year taking algebra and looking at the teacher like, I don't know what he's talking about. And it was a terrifying experience. And needless to say, I didn't do great. I wasn't a great advocator for myself at 12 or 13 years old or however old I was. So long story short, my dad said to me, he's like, look, you're not great at math and you're not that great at science, so you're going to get a business degree. And I said, I'm sorry, what? I thought I was going to go to vet school eventually, Dad. And he's like, no, I don't think so. He goes, unless you want to get an MRS degree. And I said, what's that? And he goes, if you want to get married. And I said,
MRS. Oh,
I was like,
God.
Dad, what? I was like, it's not 1950.
Right.
It's 1990, And yeah, pretty. But I mean, talk about like a shitty thing to say, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I ended up doing international business because at that point I had lived in many places and had a pretty good perspective on some of the global business stuff, and did great. It did really well, et cetera, et cetera. But come to find out, I've been in finance for, 15 years now or something like that. And I'm pretty freaking awesome at math. And it makes me angry that I allowed my dad to put that message in my head for a lot of my life. Right.
Yeah.
And, that in particular kind of informed a lot of my parenting with my kids, that if you want to work hard I will always help support you in whatever you feel like you want to improve upon. If you have a weakness or, I don't know. Parenting's different nowadays than it was back then, but, fortunately it all worked out fine, but.
Yeah. It seemed like it worked out great.
Yeah.
Good job history, great family, everything sort of fell into place.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what would you be without your parents' comments, right?
Right. Yeah, I remember one comment. I I've said it on the podcast a few times, but you may have not heard it knowing what episodes you listened to, is that there's a few things that me and my brother were interested in. Like one of them was, I remember one year I asked them if I could try a sport other than baseball or soccer. And they said, what sport? And I said, how about football? And I forget if it was my mom or my dad, or maybe we were all sitting there together. But one of them or both of them said, well, you can't do football because all football players become criminals. Like 100% across the board,
Wow,
you're destined for crime if you become like, how
funny.
are you guys raised? Like, where did that? And so it was funny because then in one of the episodes, we did sort of do a real quick time fact check and Googled like how many football players, you know, ended up getting into trouble or were criminals. And at the college level, there were a few, obviously, but that's going to be true of any population. You look at hockey players, cops, actors, like there will be those few bad apples that then maybe tainted the business a little bit. But it's just very comical to me to remember that moment when I was just shut down immediately.
Well, yeah, it's funny those things that stick with you too, right? Through your life. And another one, which no disrespect whatsoever to your listeners out there that have done this, and many of my friends and family have had this vocation at one time or another in their life too. But one of the other ones he would say is, not my mom, because my mom actually had, you know, when she was younger, I think she did this job. But anytime I would bring home a grade that was less than acceptable in his mind, which was, you know, anything below a B usually, he would just kind of look at us and go, well, I guess you're not going to be anything besides a waitress. I remember I was like,
oh,
geez.
man.
Yeah. He was rest his soul, Dad. He mellowed a little bit as he aged, but, you know, it was those things. I mean, it's interesting, and I'm sure my kids have a lot of things like that I've said to them, and I hope there's room for retraction, of course, but I've tried not to be that way.
So after you graduated, was Austin immediate, or how did that sort of transpire?
No, not immediate. So between my junior and senior year in college, I had an internship, and they sent me here to Austin. It was kind of an interesting way that kind of developed. It was working for a company that produced directories for the universities. In fact, it was called University Directories. I don't even know if it's in business anymore.
Clever name.
But it was a national program that they had internships for, and they sent us to North Carolina for a training session. But during the interview process, you know, when they decided they wanted to hire me after my junior year, they said, well, where do you want to go? We're a national firm. And which part of the country is interesting to you? And I said, well, how about somewhere in the Southwest, right? And I had friends that were at like Arizona State and some other schools, and I figured, oh, maybe they'll send me to Tempe, and I could hang out with my girlfriend Shauna all summer long, and that would be fun. We spent some time there together. And they said, well, how about Austin? And I thought, well, I've never been to Austin, so okay, sure. So they sent me to Austin, and I had this territory. It was sales, like door-to-door, business-to-business sales, selling advertising space for this directory. And back when they had phone books, right? I don't know if you've...
I've seen a few.
You've seen a few. Along with the rotary phones.
I know the yellow pages
Yes, kind of same concept.
Right.
It was for the outlying areas of the university. And my territory was, I'm trying to remember, it was 2222 South, all the way down to San Marcos, and part of Texas State, or it was called Southwest Texas State at the time. Now it's just Texas State. And so I would canvass, you know, those areas. And one of the companies that bought an ad was a high-end clothing store downtown, where my now ex-husband worked at the time. And I met him, and you had to keep going back and like make appointments with people and you know, that type of thing. And so I guess we met on one of the first times I went in there. They ended up buying an ad. I'm sure he was, you know, partly influential in that process, which was very kind of him. And we, you know, kind of developed a rapport and ended up going out. And I was new to Austin, and you know, he had kind of grown up in Austin, and his brother was a chef, and we had a great summer. And I went back to school for my senior year, and then we got engaged. We had a long distance relationship, and I got engaged in, I think, February of my senior year in college, and moved down when I graduated. So I was lucky enough to get a job, even though it was during a recession, here in Austin afterwards, and have been here ever since.
So I have one friend, I think he listens to not all the episodes, but hopefully there's a few listeners out there who are maybe either in long-distance relationships or debating being in long-distance relationships. But I know that he almost broke up with his girlfriend because they had just started things up this summer. And then she left for college in mid to late August. And so he was sort of distressed because he's very much he likes to hug her and to be with her and hold hands. And, so his love language is very much touch. And so he's just like what am I supposed to do when she's like 1,800 miles away? Like, should I just dump her? And he worded it better. But it was a fair question. I was like, dude, I'm the worst person to ask. You did it, though, and you got so what were your thoughts during that? How did you guys make that work during the long-distance part?
Let's see. So that was, it wasn't even a year, so it really wasn't too long.
Quick.
Yeah.
That's good.
We were very good about trading off visiting. So I think every other month he would come to Boulder, and every other month I would come down here.
Cool.
And my parents were living in Europe again at the time, and so I spent a fair amount of the holidays with him, and I came down for spring break and things like that. I really wanted to be here, so it made sense and it felt right. And then when I graduated, I came down. So it wasn't too bad. We talked on the phone all the time.
Yeah.
We wrote letters back when people did that. It was a great time. I was so young. I was 21.
Yeah.
And he was a little older, but you want to make it work.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were times where I was a pain in the neck and vice versa with him.
Of course. Yeah.
But in some ways it was kind of good because I had school and I was working also, and it was, and I was kind of ready to be done with school by that point. So it all made sense.
There you go.
So I'd say regular communication and things to look forward to, right? Because anticipation is a big part of like happiness and satisfaction. You have something to look forward to, whether it's travel or, I don't know, a concert or an event or something like that. It's the buildup that's most of the fun sometimes.
Right.
So.
I guess that's a really good point, is that there's other barometers. If you're really excited to see him or her calling, if you see that letter came in the mail, if you just can't wait for that next trip to Austin, but if it starts to become to feel like work, I got to go to Austin again, got to have them over in Colorado, then that might be a gauge of like,
yeah, maybe it's
not to end
right.
it, but just like keep thinking about it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very valid point. Yeah. If it becomes anything but fun and exciting, then you probably want to reconsider.
Yeah. The big question I had for you is around kids. Did you know you wanted kids? Did you always did you have that hope that you'd be a mother at one point?
That's funny because my dad liked to remind me before he passed, when because as I said, I'm the oldest of two girls, and my ex he's the middle of three kiddos, and he's got an older brother and a younger sister, and I never really gave it an enormous amount of thought until I met him, and I felt like he was somebody I could have kids with. So I think when it feels right, and you kind of that possibility enters the scene, so to speak. Once we decided that that's what we wanted to do, I was blessed with it was not a hard process for us. I think I got pregnant 2 out of the 3 times we tried, and I have 3 kids to show for it. So yeah, that's not a problem for me.
There you go.
Sorry if I embarrassed my kids by saying that, but
they'll be fine. They're all adults.
Survive.
Young adults, but they're all adults. Yeah,
that's right.
They know by now.
I hope so.
So you had Sydney, and then I can't imagine that any parents plan on having twins. You can't really plan that, right? Like it's just like
no
having twins. When you got that news, do you remember how you guys reacted?
Yeah, I distinctly remember. it was interesting because my pregnancy with Sydney was pretty easy, pretty straightforward. I never actually had horrible morning sickness. I felt nauseous in the first trimester, but never actually threw up. I was really tired, which is a symptom of the just the hormones flooding your bloodstream, and you kind of are forced to, I guess, sleep. Your body makes yourself sleep. And then coming into the second trimester, I felt fine, and we had a fairly easy birth and everything. And she was a great, easy baby. She was so easy. She slept through the night at 10 weeks, and she was awesome. And so next time we naively assumed, oh, it'll be great, no problems whatsoever. And so hopefully it's not too much TMI, but it was like a double. I just doubled that one. Anyway, so when we decided we were going to try to conceive again, we wanted a boy. And I read some books and let's just put it this way, I applied all the techniques suggested in the books. And not only did we have one boy, we had two. So
it really works.
It really works. So for people who tell me you can't influence the sex of your child, I don't know. It worked for us. So I didn't know, because my pregnancy was actually easier the first trimester with the boys than it was with Sydney. I didn't have the nausea, and I wasn't exhausted, and I had a 2-year-old running around. I was, had to take care of. So it wasn't as big of a deal. The only sign we had that something was a little bit out of the ordinary was that I was measuring big. Like, they measure your stomach when you're pregnant, and that seems like such an archaic thing to do, but they do that, right? Yeah. To make sure, how far it's sticking out or whatever. So I was measuring a little big, and they didn't find anything strange about that, because second babies are usually much bigger. And secondly, my ex-husband was like a 10.5-pound baby, right? He was a big boy. And so we didn't really think much of it. And so at 20 weeks, because it was a low-risk pregnancy, I ended up going in to have an ultrasound, which was on schedule for that. And the ultrasound tech, I remember it like it was yesterday. She looked at my stomach and she said, "Oh, so you're measuring a little big, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what they say." I said, "But he was a 10.5-pound baby or whatever." And he was there next to me. And she puts the ultrasound one on my stomach and she goes, "You guys are having two." And she goes, "Look, 2 heads." And we were like, "What?" And never in a million years did the thought even enter my mind. And you can see in the video, there's shaking going on, because I think we were, I don't know, freaked out or whatever. But And all he could think about was 2 college educations, 2 sets of shoes, 2 this, 2 that, 2 that, and he was just like, oh my God, overwhelmed. And I was like, oh, how did we not know what was going on? And then I started worrying, I'm a data person, and I was like, how do we not know that there's 2 babies in there? Because I had every test under the sun. And the truth of the matter is that the ranges are so broad that you could, for a lot of the testing that they do for, concerns and things like that, that you could fit 2 normal babies inside this range. It's so broad.
Wow.
And so, I just want to make sure nothing was wrong and that they were healthy in the whole thing. So turns out they were fantastic. And then, of course, I had to kind of figure out what was my way to cope with the new news. So going from 1 kid to 3 kids overnight.
Yep.
And I was a little overwhelmed and very daunting, as you might imagine. And, I learned a lot of statistics in the process that natural twins are about 1 in every 70 births. And now that fertility is such a common thing to undergo with people who are, having trouble conceiving, I'm sure those numbers it's probably more frequent than that. So, contrary to popular belief, fraternal twins do not run in families, even though I have them on both sides of my family, but that's not, there's too many generations that skip to be attributable. It's supposed to be the identical twins, I believe, that are somewhat hereditary. So, and they were born 4.5 weeks early, which is almost, I think that was 10 days early for twins. So healthy.
Good.
in the hospital 2 nights, and that was it. It was a little bit more of a non-standard birth, let's put it that way. We had one the old-fashioned way, and one had to be C-section, but, that's, I don't do anything easy, so got to work through the hardest possible way.
And then were the boys similar to Sydney at all in the sense of like sleeping through the night and whatnot, or was that a little bit different as well?
I mean, that was a tough period for me. I'll be completely honest. There's a saying that youth is wasted on the young, and the ability to sleep is wasted on the young. The energy level is wasted on the young. You don't even know that you don't have wrinkles until one day you look in the mirror and you're like, what is this? And you're like, I didn't even enjoy it when I didn't have it. How did that happen?
Right.
It's some strange things like that you don't really realize till after it's like in the rearview mirror. So I did not have postpartum depression with them, but I had postpartum anxiety, and that was due to sleep deprivation. And, with Sydney, she didn't have a drop of formula. She was nursed the entire time. I kind of took it for granted that it would be that easy with the boys. And I tried very, very hard to do the same thing, but it was a bit of an overwhelming exercise. I mean, they were eating every 2 hours, and to the point where you had to wake them up to get them to eat. And by the time you wake one up and feed them, you wake the other up and feed them and change them and then put them back down. It's like 2 hours have passed by practically. Right. It's just this endless treadmill of feeding and, all that stuff. And it just became a lot, and I wasn't sleeping really well and always anticipating them getting up, and it just became tough. So they started, I think we made it 6 months, and then they ended up having some formula, but that's still a pretty big accomplishment for twins, to be honest. And they slept through the night. Like at some point, I got to the point where I couldn't keep getting up multiple times a night. And it was just taking too big of a toll on me. And so I think they were 4 months old, and we started doing what's called the Ferber method, where you kind of let them cry a little bit, but you pat them on the back and let them know that you're there. And once they get to be a certain size, they have enough fat on their body, like body fat percentage, that they can sleep through the night. You're not going to make your child malnourished. Usually the rule of thumb is about 2 times birth weight, but I think they were close to 20 pounds at that point. They were just used to getting up. And so we did the Ferber method. I think it took a few days, and I remember sleeping outside their door and just patting them and making sure. And eventually we got to the point where they slept through the night, and then they were champs after that. So it was good. They've always been pretty good sleepers. Jackson is a little bit of a live wire. He's like his mama and wants to get up early and make sure he's having as much fun as possible and talking to everybody. So, and then when it came time, I was telling this story the other day, to move them from crib to big boy bed. We tried to defer that as long as possible. So we had 2 cribs in their room, and Jordan was pretty chill and not a big climber. And Jackson was like a spider monkey and would climb out and do everything he could. And I would sometimes go up there and he'd be outside of his crib, and like, hey mom, even though he knew he wasn't supposed to get out, I even got one of those, they have these tents that you can put over the crib so that they can't get out. He figured out how to get out of that. So I was like, all right, fine, we're going to go to the big boy bed, and that wasn't too bad. So
my older sister and my older brother, one of them will remember this. I want to say I was the spider monkey of the 2 boys, but it also could have been him. But I do remember my mom saying that when raising one of the 2 of us, we were just a culprit of constantly escaping that thing, and we were always flipping one leg over and hurling the rest of our body over the other side. I just can't remember in the moment which one of us it was, but she definitely brought up that story on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
So then at some point, I know that you decided to take a break in your career and become a full-time parent for a little bit. How old were the kids when you made that decision?
So I started staying home full-time when Sydney was 6 months old. So I did my FMLA, family leave thing for, I don't remember what it was at the time. I think maybe I don't remember really, it's so long ago. But And then I went back. I was going to go back, but then we couldn't really kind of figure out the schedule thing. And at that point in my career, I was doing high-tech direct business-to-business marketing. Their dad was making significantly more money than me, and so it just didn't really make sense to go through and spend the money on daycare and the commute, because I was working up in North Austin, even though we lived right by your gym. And so we just decided I was going to stay at home, and that was great. I mean, I got super involved in the kids' school as they grew up, and homeroom mom and PTO board and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I started painting because I was trying to kind of like develop another part of me as a parent. I didn't want to be just super analytical project manager, high-tech person. I wanted to kind of work on this creative side, and I have some family members who are pretty decorated artists, and so I was like, I've got to have some of the genes. And so I took some classes, and I really fell in love with it and became pretty good at it. I showed
cool.
some art and won some awards, and I had kind of a business where I would do custom card design, which was pretty cool, like greeting card type of things. It sounds funny when I say it like that, but and I did that for a while until the twins were born. And then everything pretty much came to a screeching halt for a while because it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So
It's funny that you say that. My older sister is doing exactly that right now.
Oh, yeah?
She's dabbling in watercolors, and as one of the ways to just, partly for fun and partly just make some extra cash, she turns the originals into greeting cards and sells them as like 20 packs. So that's so
wonderful.
funny.
Yeah. Well, it's much more, I would take paintings that I wasn't really happy with overall, but I would tear them up kind of strategically, and I could make them into pieces that you would mount on cards, and people loved them. I mean, I couldn't keep them in stock. They were awesome. So I really want to get back to that someday. It's just, it's not the kind of thing where you're like, oh, I'm going to do this for 15 minutes. You have to kind of like sit down and kind of get in that mindset and start creating, you know?
I do. Yeah, with I don't know if you noticed all the puzzle pieces, but one puzzle takes me 2 months, because in those 2 months, I probably only work on it like 4 times or something like that, because I sit down and I'm there for 2.5 hours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to kind of get in that part of your brain, to do the creating. But I have space to do it at our house now, so I want to do it. I did a teeny tiny one during COVID, and I was like, that took a lot of time.
Hey, now that all 5 kids are gone, you'll notice some
right.
windows of time in your schedule, and you'll start to pick it back up.
Yes, I know. I need to let work creep in less and fun stuff more.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. When it came time for you to go back to work, did you have any fear or reservations or intimidations of just like, oh my God, I've been out of this for so long? Like, I would almost feel like if you stopped going to the gym for 8 years, it'd be like, might be intimidating to walk back in there for the first time and just be like, am I going to remember that math and how to do it? So did you have any reservations, or was it more of like you were just ready to go back because you missed it so much?
Without a doubt, lots of reservations. I had contemplated it for, a number of different times throughout the 8.5 years that I stayed at home. It happened ultimately it coincided with the time when I separated from my kid's dad. And I decided, I'm not a dummy. I'm going to have to go back to work. That's what makes sense. And so I started out doing a contract kind of arrangement with another high-tech company, and I think that lasted 3 months or so, and then that came to an end, and so I started looking for work in earnest. And it's interesting, kind of the thought process that I went through. So being in high-tech direct marketing before then, in high tech, as you probably know from being a recruiter, you can work as many hours of the day as there are pretty much, and you're only really as good as your last software release, your last hardware release, your last campaign, et cetera. And so it was just this constant ongoing, there was more work than there were hours in the day. And when I didn't have kids, I could devote some of that time, work till 7 at night, and then come home and do whatever. And when you have children, you have to, daycare closes. Yep. they have to stay on a schedule. They need to get sleep. That's most important for them, first and foremost, but also for you as an adult, because you need to rest as well. Yeah. And so I really kind of paused and I thought, well, do I want to go back to high tech? Probably not, because I'm not sure I can keep a healthy balance there and be, the employee I wanted to be and I knew I was capable of. So I considered changing industries, and I kind of looked around and I thought, well, what industry has some boundaries on it that kind of, at least your weekends are a little bit protected? And honestly, finance is that way. Mm-hmm. A large part of the industry is focused around market hours, Monday through Friday. And so depending on which part of the industry you're in, it's very difficult to get a hold of advisors or investment management shops or what have you if it's outside of market hours. So I took a job with a small RIA firm here in Austin. And, it's not that I'm not proud of it, but it's kind of hard for me to say at the time. But I started as the receptionist / office manager, making $10 an hour. And, I worked my way back up. They let me do some marketing projects, and I kind of parlayed that into some networking events with some people that were there at the firm. They introduced me to another firm, and I took a role there. That evolved into a sales job, and I did very, very well there and kind of grew up in the business and helped build out teams and took on more responsibility. And here we are 15 years later. So you just never know how things are going to work out. And I mean, it's not that I was thrilled about it. I don't know. There's nothing wrong with starting at $10 an hour. It's just that reservations you were talking about. Mm-hmm. But at the time I thought, my gosh, I have to have this job that when I get out, I can go pick up my kids from elementary school. I need to be able to have benefits because I no longer had health insurance. Mm-hmm. I had to make some choices, and it had all of these things. It did not have the greatest pay. So that was the concession at the time. Unfortunately, I had some other forms of support, for a time being. But it was very motivating for me. And it takes me back to one of the things that my friend Karen, which she said, and I like to remind her of this sometimes, but how prophetic she was at the time. But when I was contemplating going through a divorce, and making that ultimate choice, which was a gut-wrenching decision, I said, I'm terrified. I remember we were running on the hike and bike trail and talking about it, and I said, I'm really scared, and I just want to know that the kids are going to be okay, and that I'm going to be okay. And she turned to me like the punch in the gut that it was, and she said, what choice do you have? And I thought, and I could have taken that a couple of different ways, but I took it as like, they're going to have to be okay, and I'm going to have to be okay, and I'm going to have to lead them through this. And I guess that's what I did. So, it wasn't very sugar-coated at the time, but she was right, 1,000%. So
I don't like to jump back and forth between business and family, but I feel like your story, okay. it's interwoven. It's interwoven. Did you, as you went through that divorce, did you feel like there was anything that you had to get over? Any negative talk that you were telling yourself, or just any self-doubt or fear of failure, or was it sort of, to Karen's point, where once you made the decision, you were just like, yeah, that was right, and you were able to move on? What was that experience like?
You mean, I'm not sure, do you mean about making the decision, or?
I guess I'm asking, did you have any not fear, did you feel like you were a failure when the divorce happened, or, like you had done something wrong, or was there any just like negative self-talk that you had to move on from so you could go to the next chapter of your life?
I'm sure there was. I try wherever I can in my life to not have regrets, to make the best decision I can with the information I have on hand at the time. Yeah. And at that point, things were, it was tough. We weren't seeing each other, and I don't mean like literally. I mean like we just were not connecting anymore. Communication-wise, personality-wise, there's a lot of things. And, I do not look back at that time period at all as a failure. I have 3 amazing kids.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
They're just, I'm so grateful. And today being I don't know, sorry, I get emotional about it, but my oldest being 24 today, it's like I can remember the day she was born, of course, today, 24 years ago.
Yeah.
But they're such amazing humans, and I'm very grateful for them. So I have no regrets. And, their dad and I are as, we get along as well as we possibly can. We're practically neighbors. He lives in the same neighborhood now as me. So we see each other walking dogs in the morning. So that's kind of fun, I guess.
That's funny, yeah.
And today we were like, it's Sydney's birthday, yay! And, it's kind of silly and cheesy, to be honest. But, we've come a long way. Let's put it that way. So, no, I don't, I don't know, the kids were top priority for me. Thanks. Thanks for the tissue.
You're welcome.
I cry when I'm happy and when I'm sad.
I get that.
My kids give me a hard time about that sometimes.
No, that was a beautiful moment. I'm really glad I got to share that with you. It just showed how much love you have for your kids. That was amazing.
They are the most important thing in the world to me.
Yeah. So fast forward, I'm not sure how many years, but you fell in love again, or you met someone else.
Yes.
And what's his name?
Sean.
Shout out to Sean. How did you guys meet?
Sean. Well, that's a fun story too.
Yay.
So we were family friends, actually, and we actually all met for the very first time when we were on vacation in Hawaii in 2000. And he and his wife, they were on the same flights as us, and we went to Maui, and they had a little boy in a stroller that was very similar age to Sydney at the time. Sydney was 7 months old, and Spencer was 8.5 months old, I guess, because he's 6 or 7 weeks older than Sydney. And like the nerdy parents of that with kids that age are, you gravitate towards other people in the same boat because you're all going through the same things at the same time, and
right.
It's just like community. And so we were on the same flights. I think we were in the airport, like, hey, hi, and we didn't know each other. And we were at the baggage claim, and then we're like, oh yeah, no. And we thought we maybe knew each other socially. Perhaps we'd crossed paths at some point or something. And then the next morning, we get up and go out to the pool for the very first day after, the next day. And there they are at the pool. They're at the same resort. And we were like, okay, I guess we're going to hang out together.
Great.
And so we all hung out and went to dinner a few times, took, family pictures for each other that are funny. We still have them today. And then when we got back to Austin, we were family friends. So we did like the birthday parties, the holiday parties together, things like that. I think we went on a couple of double dates. We were couples friends, and they soon after had Josh, who is my younger stepson, and they kind of disappeared because he was born premature, and it was just a pretty intense time period in their lives. And so they weren't like out on the social circuit as much as they had been before, if you can call it that with small children. And then subsequently we had the twins, and we disappeared for a while. Sure. And so there had been a number of years that had passed by, and we still invited each other to respective birthday parties and things like that. And so I think we'd run into them at my ex's 40th birthday. They came over, and we hadn't seen them in a number of years. And then that was it for a long time. And then when I was single for a time period, I was on Match, and like hardcore eye rolls from my kids. I'm like, sorry. I know, I'm sure Match is not cool now, but at the time, it was okay. Anyway, so... and so I was like so overwhelmed with it because it's an overwhelming thing, yeah. Right? And I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to meet people otherwise. And so I would do this thing where you, at the time, and again, this was 15 years ago, at the time, you could see who had been looking at your profile without like looking at anybody specific. You could like look it up, and it would be like, David's viewed you, and David 123 has viewed you. And so I'd be like, well, clearly something on there is interesting to David, that he's looking at me. So let me see who these people are.
Right.
And this guy popped up one day, and I was like, that looks like Sean. And I was like, what? I had no idea they were split up.
Right.
And so I sent him a message. I was like, hey, I had no idea. I'm so sorry to hear. I hope everything's okay. That was it. And he sent me a message back. He's like, yes, you know, he didn't give me any details, but he's like, so if you're interested, I'd like to get together so I could learn what it's like to be a single person after not dating for 15 years and hear about it from your perspective. And I was kind of like, okay, sure. And I had honestly had no idea. I'd never spent a minute alone with this guy. I just knew him as, you know, we were couple friends and family friends, and thought he was a smart guy, very, you know, super busy guy, did a bunch of entrepreneurial things. And so we met and had a glass of wine and learned that we had a ton of stuff in common. And again, didn't know that because we'd never spent any time alone together or even had a conversation one-on-one. And we ended up shutting the restaurant down, and we've pretty much been together ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's funny how things work.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just never know.
Match.com.
That's right. That's right. I owe it all to Match.
For the win.
Yeah. So.
How did the process go of bringing the two families together? Was it pretty smooth and everyone got along from day one? Was there any like weird awkwardness or tension, or just how did that process go?
Well, I had been single for, I think, about 18 months at that point. Is that right? I think that's about right, when we first started dating. And he was at the tail end of his process. And, you know, he wasn't the first person that I dated, and I was pretty reserved about introducing my kids to anybody unless I kind of, in fact, all of them I kind of couched as like a friend. And it was in a group setting, and it wasn't a big deal. So there wasn't any expectation on anybody's part, really. And Sean took it to another level with his arrangement that he had with his former spouse, in that they both agreed to the fact that they wouldn't introduce people until significant other until they'd been together, I think 6 months at the time. And so we were very limited in the early days. Once we'd passed that time frame and we were still together, and we kind of decided that we were going to bring our families together, we actually spent some time with a family counselor to kind of get guidance on the best way to do it.
Cool.
Yeah, and because we didn't want to, you know, they'd already had some major disruptions in their lives with their parents splitting up, and so we wanted to try and make it as low impact as possible, if that's even conceivable. I mean, it rocks their world no matter what. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the best way to do that. And I don't know, it's nice because all 5 kids are within, they're all right now ages almost 21 to 24, so they're pretty tightly spaced. So, you know, they had a fair amount in common. There was a lot of, we actually went on a number of road trips together. We moved in together right before we were married, but within a year, or we got married within a year. But, you know, there have been some bumps, but I think for the most part, it's been a growing experience for everybody. Everybody's like, are they the best friends? And I'm like, it's not the Brady Bunch. We're one short of the Brady Bunch, but, you know, I'd say they treat each other like siblings. They tolerate each other. Cool. They have respect for each other. Some, you know, there are some groups that get along closer than others at times. It just depends, right? But first and foremost, they're each their own individual person, and they're autonomous, and, you know, they're all unique, amazing humans. So.
Yeah. What I really like about your story, and why I just wanted to have you on, is just from everything from the unexpected twins to the switching industries from, it was tech first, finance. From tech to finance after an 8-year break, starting as an office manager, having some humility, climbing back up to the ranks, to the position you are now. And just from, at least from where I'm sitting, it looks like, while you have had several bumps in the road, you've powered your way through them. You've had a lot of grit and a lot of determination. And my hope is that while we're not wrapping up, it might sound like I'm wrapping up, but we're not quite yet, is that your episode will reach that mother or maybe even another father who's in the thick of those bumps and can see that it is possible to fight your way past them and be able to sit here on your daughter's 24th birthday and talk about it with confidence and have a ton of laughs about it. And it's just a really inspiring story. So thank you so much for being so genuine and so transparent, because you shared some really darn personal stuff, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Before we sort of move on from family and from business, any other stories, anything else that you think we should note in those two categories?
Oh boy. I mean, I would say, I think it's a question you asked me earlier when we spoke on the phone, but something about mentoring and... Yeah, you had mentioned that it sounds like you've had someone that you can basically always soundboard off of and to get advice from. And I have a friend who gave me this great analogy once that we can only see in front of us, but a coach, a guide, a mentor, whoever it is, they have the ability to see above you, your left, your right, behind you, and essentially give you perspective that when maybe you're so in your own head, it might be obvious what the decision is, but you can't get there on your own. So I guess for you, how have you gone about finding mentors, and just any advice you'd give on why you also believe why it's important to have someone to soundboard off of from time to time? Sure. I mean, that is, yes, very well said, by the way.
That's not my quote.
Oh, well.
That was all Tim, so credit to Tim.
That's, I've never thought about it that way, but you are so right. I mean, look, I have a wealth of gratitude for the people that have been mentors in my life. I've been fortunate enough that I'm not afraid to ask for help when I need it, and or perspective. And when I connect with somebody, especially somebody that's got more wisdom than I have, I really want to learn what they think, right? Because where are my blind spots? I mean, we certainly have them, right? And I just think it's important. The more information you can get, I mean, within reason, of course, the better. And so I would say professionally, it's really smart to have mentors, and personally too. I mean, I have a couple of groups of girlfriends that are just indispensable to me, so important. I went to Italy last year with 5 of them, and that was like a trip of a lifetime, which I hope to do again. And I just had lunch or dinner last week with one of my mentors. So kind of professionally and personally, she kind of bridges areas for me. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It kind of touches on so many different aspects of what we have talked about. But, everybody has their challenges, and everybody has unique ways of coping with those challenges. And for me personally, I'm big on processing and like kind of externally processing, meaning I talk about things, I talk through them. Well, what about this and what about that? And I oftentimes come to a conclusion, but then I want to kind of test that conclusion with my mentors, right? Well, what do you think about this? And they've helped me kind of think of things that I hadn't necessarily seen. So that's important, and I have a couple of male professional mentors too that I value their judgment and their insights, especially in our business. It can be tough to be a pretty type A woman in finance, and it's largely male dominated, and you walk kind of a fine line sometimes about all of those cliches they say about women, and where men are assertive but women are aggressive or bitchy, and trying to kind of make sure that you're not, it's a very subtle line sometimes. So I try to benefit from other people's wisdom.
Yeah,
for sure. So as far as how to get a mentor, I mean, I don't know. If you gravitate towards somebody, I think that's probably one of the biggest compliments somebody can receive is to ask to be someone's mentor, to be honest. I've seen it happen, and I mean, I just think it's a really neat thing. And I have I'm trying to help one of my daughter's friends right now with a role at our company, and fingers crossed it works out. But she's been so sweet and so kind about the whole thing, and it just makes me happy. I really hope it works out, and she ends up loving it. Not necessarily in the way I love finance, but in the way she does, and it opens up a new world for her. So
yeah, There's one thing you just said that you one of the ways you process things is to talk about them, correct?
Yes.
There is a friend of mine who, you talked about the MRS degree and well, I guess you're going to be a wage. One of the things that I was not exposed to for a little bit was when a buddy of mine in December of 2021, his older brother was only 31, 32 years old and passed away about 18 days before Christmas.
Wow.
And a year after the event, we were in the gym together, and I asked him how he was doing with his brother's passing. And he immediately teared up, which I could see is natural, especially when he's that young. Like, in a year isn't a lot of time. Of course, you're still going to be broken up about it. But sure. I asked him, have you been talking about this to anybody, whether that is a counselor, your parents, your other siblings, a friend, your girlfriend, anybody? And he made a statement to me, and he said, I can't talk about it because that's not how I was raised. He's like, men don't cry and men don't talk about things. And I said, but it was your brother's death. Like,
huge.
That's huge. And all I had to do was ask the question, and his shoulders slumped, his head went down, his eyes watered up, and I could tell, like, I just brought back a wave of emotion that he was very much not processing. So, not to project his that moment on all guys, but I do feel like that is something that is pushed onto guys still, is of like, oh, we don't cry, we're men, we don't talk about. What advice would you give someone like my friend who would remain unnamed, if you had been there with him in that moment and you could give him some advice? What do you think you would tell him?
Oh boy.
You've just, you fought through so many of these stereotypes, I guess you could call them, or
I mean, it's just, I hate to say the well-worn cliche, but it's just life, I mean, it's growth. And one of my favorite fortune cookie fortunes is experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. and that sure is true.
Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want.
That's right.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I keep trying to tell my kiddos right now. Even Jackson, right? I mean, they have, and I'm sure I did too coming out of school, but they have a lot of strong ideas about what they do and don't want to do, but yet that conviction is not really backed by a lot of experience. And sometimes in life, it's just as important to try something and find out you don't like it than it is to not try it at all, right? Or it's almost like it's kind of a offshoot of learning from failure, right? And I don't know if I'm trying to come up with a decent example, but my whole thing is like, try something, and if you don't like it, you do something else and move on to the next thing. Or maybe that opens up another door that you hadn't previously considered, and that might be something you really like. I mean, we've all had these ideas. I'll give you an example. So I think when I was staying at home, I wanted to, contribute to my community. And so I went and volunteered. I think we may have talked about this on the phone. I volunteered at the Humane Society downtown. And I was hoping that they would be really pumped to use my marketing experience and project management experience. And they're like, you can go walk those dogs. And I was like, what? Seriously? That's what I get to do? Okay. And so I walked the dogs, and I did that for a few weeks. It came a couple times a week and put in some time. And then I started to think, like, at the time, it's different now, but I didn't walk my own dogs. So I was like, that's just not really what I had in mind, right, in terms of helping. And, my first job out of college was I was just so happy to have a job. And it was this outside sales, business to business, door to door, cold calling, to the point where I think 6 months in, David, I would wake up in the morning and look at my watch and go, I'll be done with that job in 9 hours. I can be back home in 9 hours or whatever. I mean, I hated it. But I needed a job because I didn't want to have to rely on my parents, and I certainly didn't want to ask them for help. And so, I had downtown territory, and I would go to an office building downtown. I would start at the top floor and cold call the businesses, one floor at a time, until the security guard would escort me out for soliciting. And you're not allowed to do that. And now the elevators are secure, so you can't necessarily get in and do that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, talk about horrible. It was a horrible job. And so what it taught me was I don't want to do outside sales cold calling. You're not going to find me selling pest control door to door in a neighborhood or whatever it is that people bang on doors for. So, that was a very valuable experience. I don't know. So, I was trying to remember what we got off tangent. Sorry, or I got off topic. Sorry.
We were talking about my friend and
oh,
his
that's right.
brother.
What would you tell him?
Yeah.
Gosh, that was way off topic. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. It was great.
I would say you don't have to do this alone. And honestly, you don't. And nobody really has to know if you're seeking help. There are professionals out there, and it can be, and they're bound by a, code of ethics and privacy and what have you. And I mean, the other thing that I've learned as I've gotten older is that when you kind of stuff down those feelings or swallow it or deny it or pretend it's not happening, without a doubt, it will leak out in another part of your life. Without any control on your part, right? You might, it's kind of like that old adage, you had a bad day at work, you come home and you kick the dog, right? Family trauma, family experience, things that get passed on generation to generation. I think it's the current generation's responsibility to try to make it better for the next generation. There's no need to continue to pass that on, whether it's abuse or some sort of dysfunctional something. But that poor guy, that breaks my heart. I mean, that just makes me so sad for him. I mean, I would, gosh, he must have had to suffer major consequences about being upset or showing emotion if he's that reserved and stoic about it. I mean, I can't imagine. That's a life-altering experience to lose a sibling.
It is. Yeah, it's hard to not think about the day he told me, the first day I saw him in person, because I'll always remember that look on his face and just...
Bad.
Yeah, can't get that one out of my head. But
Yeah.
I saw him again, though, about a month ago, and he seems to be doing a lot better. So we didn't talk about his brother specifically, but I did notice that there seemed to be a little bit less of a weight off his shoulders. He was smiling a little bit more, and he seemed to be a little bit more of himself, and it was really good to see him in that disposition.
Yeah,
So-
that's awesome. Well, I mean, obviously he connected with you, and I mean, if you are somebody to take that on, not take it on, that's the wrong word, but like be there for him, you could say, hey, let's go grab a cup of coffee or a beer or whatever, and you don't have to talk about that, but just kind of holding space for him if he wanted to. You've already expressed a willingness to listen, and that's giving. Listening is giving.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if he loves it or hate it, but anytime we work out together, I force him to sit in one of our cars together and talk about it afterwards.
Oh, well, see,
And he
you're already
seems-
doing
and
it.
he opens up to me, so I'll keep doing that for him as long as he needs it.
David's counseling. That's right. Seriously. Perhaps, well, I was going to say, it's funny you say that because in my last role at my current company, I had to spend an hour every quarter with the relationship managers, and part of what I would do is kind of let them air their grievances. And, you have those Zoom backgrounds, or we have Teams, and you can change the background. And every time I would have a meeting with them, depending on my rapport with them, some of them I knew really well and some of them I didn't know as well, but I would put the one that had like the love seat back here. It's like a standard Teams background, and it had like a soothing picture and color of the wall. And I'd be like, come on in, have a seat on the couch. What's on your mind? And they would laugh. I'm like, what's troubling you? And they just blah, like barf it out. So, sometimes you just have to open the invitation. But I had done that role before, so I kind of knew what it was like for them. So, well, that's so nice of you to do that for that guy.
I appreciate that.
Seriously.
I love him to death, so I want him, if that's what I can be for him in this time, then
Yeah.
There is one question that I asked Jackson that I wanted to also ask you.
Oh.
Because I really wanted to get someone else's perspective on it.
Okay.
So one of the questions we talked about is, do you feel like there's any pitfalls? We said in our episode, Generation Z specifically is succumbing to, but when you look at younger people, whether they're, I don't know how many kids or teens outside of your own family you have in your life, but as you just think about like people in their 10 to 30 age range and in that group, or maybe even just through your own kids, I don't know, but just how would you answer that question? Is there anything that you see that any pitfalls that they're stepping into and maybe solutions to avoid them?
Yeah, I would say, gosh, and I don't mean to say this in a callous way, but like pull your head up and put the phone down. You know, there's a lot of looking. I'm holding my hand. I know you have a video, but a lot of looking at the world through this portal that is the phone, and I've realized that everybody knows objectively that what you see on social media is very curated, very selected and optimized. But I think it was on, I don't know, another podcast I've listened to recently that, comparison is the thief of happiness. And that's a very overdone trope, of course, but couldn't be more true in many cases. And I would say optimizing your own life for you and what is best for you is what's most important. Kim Kardashian is a industry in and of herself, and maybe this is a bad analogy, but I don't know. It's put your phone down, pull your head up, and I would say also communicate more with the people, with the live people that are around you. I feel like that art is being lost, so to speak. Ironically, I was looking at social media yesterday. I sent something to a friend of mine on Instagram, and it was like funny texts that you get from teens, and some of them were so funny, like because they're so ridiculous. And I guess parents are like a serious form of embarrassment nowadays. But like if I talk to my parents the way these kids talk to, like I've been talked to by my kids, I mean, for example, this lady commented that her husband sang a hymn at a funeral, and her kid was like, "Dad, you're so extra. Why do you have to be so extra?" Or, "All my friends are going to be there. Please walk normal." Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like
that's funny.
Yeah. And one of them was a daughter was talking to her mom, and she said something like, "Are you going to put makeup on before we go pick up my friend? Because if you're not, I'm just going to tell her that you're sick." Like, what? Like, I mean, I know they're teenagers, right? So, okay, fine. But, like, parents have feelings, too, you know? I mean, they're human beings. Like, just, can you walk normal? What does that even mean? I don't know. I made my husband read them because they're pretty funny. They're just silly. So, I don't know. Practice communicating, I would say there's nothing more wonderful than the sound of your kid's voice when they want to talk to you. And even if they're upset, you always want to be there for them. And it's so important. When they were little, it was tough sometimes. But when my kids call me, especially unsolicited, it's joyous usually. Sometimes I wonder if something's wrong. But, oftentimes they call excited and that's fun. So communicate and know that your parents have feelings.
When I first moved to Austin, I set a goal for myself that every day I left the home, I had to meet one new person.
That's a good one. Look at you.
It was rough. There was definitely days I didn't want to do it, and I still forced myself to do it. And what I can say now after doing it for about 9 months is that I stopped doing it not because I gave up, but because I've met enough people, I'm either doing it naturally or I don't need to.
Oh.
So I can go to the gym and see 4 or 5 faces I recognize and talk to all of them. It's changed a little bit now. I recently got a plastic business card with a QR code for the podcast on it. So now my new goal is someone once per day has to scan the card. And I'm not perfect at it. I was at the gym today and I had like 5 or 6 people who looked sort of friendly, and I thought they seem approachable, and I'm just going to walk up and be like, hey, do you listen to podcasts? Will you check this one out? I didn't do it today for one reason or another. Call it nerves, call it fear, call it whatever. But I'm not going to spend the rest of the evening mentally flogging myself because someone didn't scan that darn QR code.
Yeah,
I think the more important thing is that the intention is there and that I accomplished the goal the last 3 days. And so if anything, it should be celebrated that potentially there's 3 new followers versus, oh, I failed today, therefore I'm a failure. So I meeting a new person a day is a pretty, I think, aggressive goal, but in agreement to your, getting off your phone more. I feel like I've spent a significantly less time on my phone in the last couple months. And even today, I also didn't have my headphones on at the gym, which 99% of the time, let me just say, I do. But today, I really just sort of wanted to observe the room and listen on other people's conversations and just sort of have a feeling for what was going on around me. And I think it's actions like that have also led to the not needing to meet a new person a day now, because I have started to already form a group of friends here, which has been really nice. And if I didn't have that goal, there may be people that I've never met that I'm super blessed to have in my life now. So
there you go.
Yeah,
right.
I love that one.
I'm proud of you for look at you reaching out. That's amazing. That's very admirable.
It's very scary.
Really?
Now not as much. I think today, for some reason, I got into I was telling myself this seems pushy, because usually before I bring up the podcast, I'll bring up something else. So I saw someone doing something the other day I'd never seen in the gym before. So I walked up to him and I was just like, dude, I'm putting my pride aside. Can you show me how to do that? Because that's a cool workout I've never seen. He's like, sure. So he taught it to me, and then we talked for a minute or two, and then I just brought it up naturally, even though this was my intention the whole time of hey, you want to listen to this podcast? And sure enough, he was a huge podcaster, and he listens to them all the time, and so it worked out really well. But I forget what you said. Oh, I said it's sometimes scary. I think I'm also getting better at it, because like anything with practice, you're going to get more natural. And I've now been doing this every day for 9 months. So yeah. I think I'm pretty good at approaching strangers at this point.
I would say so. Yeah, for sure. And, don't beat yourself up. Like you said, if you have an off day here and there, and I mean, there are days when I don't really want to talk to people, even though I'm normally it comes pretty easy. We were driving back, I had a tournament this weekend in Ledbetter, which is kind of on the way to Houston, sort of. Anyway, it's about 80 miles from here, and we stopped at Buc-ee's on the way home. Have you been to Buc-ee's yet? Have you experienced Buc-ee's?
I discovered Buc-ee's.
Yeah, and Sunday afternoons are not a great time to go in there. I was like, good grief, there's 8 million people in here, and I just needed to use the restroom, and I wanted a sandwich, and it was, I don't know. And I was relaying this experience to one of my very dear friends from college, and she's like, well, I don't know why you were expecting to connect with humanity at Buc-ee's. And I was like, come on. I was like, I just wasn't in the mood to to mill around with a bunch of people. Right. And they were fine. It was no big deal. But it just kind of gave me pause. You know what, you're right. I don't know why I was expecting that to be awesome. But there was just a lot of people there. And it was one of those things, I was fine until trying to pull out, and I clearly was trying to back out of the parking space, and nobody would stop to let me out. And I was kind of come on, you guys, let's be, what happened to the, being nice to people? I have my backup lights on, come on. And anyway, so I managed to get home.
There you go. Buc-ee's was an extraordinary experience. I went there on a Tuesday at midnight. Don't ask me why.
I hope there weren't a lot of people there for you.
I was shocked.
Oh, really?
That on a Tuesday at midnight. And so one of my buddies sort of said what you just said. He was like, just don't come at like 5 o'clock on a weekday or on like the weekends in general.
That was my
just
mistake.
avoid them.
Yeah.
So one thing we do on here is I always like to have my prior guest ask the next guest a question. Normally they know nothing about you, but I felt like the questions were getting a little stale, and maybe it was because it was so, they literally knew nothing about you. So I showed them bits and pieces of your LinkedIn profile and told him a little bit about what we talked on the phone. And after hearing everything about you, his question to you is that you seem like you're incredibly driven. You know, you could have accepted just like a particular role, or you could have cut like exercise out of your life. But he said that everything you seem to do, you seem like you have some really focused goals and that you're really chasing something. And he just sort of wanted to know like where that drive or fire or hustle, whatever word you want to put to it, he felt like you're someone who doesn't settle for just acceptable of like, oh, well, my paycheck's enough to raise a family, so I'll just stop here. Or my health is good enough, so I'll have an extra drink. Or I'm sort of just pulling examples out of the air. But that's the question, is just where's that drive come from?
Wow, that's a great question. There's got to be something inside that keeps me pushing forward, I guess. I don't know. I'm a big believer that life is a work in progress, and it sounds like super cheesy and cliche, but like there's always room for improvement, right? I can always be a better parent, a better wife, a better employee, a better friend. How do I feel like I owe a lot of who I am and the success I've had in my life to all of those important people, to me, and it's my responsibility to give them the best of what I have to offer. So, I don't know. I guess I'm all super curious, and my husband would say nosy. So, I mean, I like to learn. I kind of have a learning mindset, you know, like if especially if I'm interested in something, of course, right? And I like to feel like I'm improving at things. I mean, that's probably why I like CrossFit, because I'm good enough that I can kind of hold my own, but I'm by no means great. And so, like just the other day, after 10 years, Greg, the co-founder, or the co-owner, he said to me, I could not get double unders, you know, the jump roping, like forever. And I just had kind of like resigned myself. I was like, I can do all these other complex physical balance, multi-coordinated things, and I can't do the stinking double unders. And I was like, whatever, fine, I guess I just can't do it. And one day he looked at me and he's like, Steph, your jump rope is way too short. And so he gave me one of the ones that longer and like that. And I'm not great, but I can string like 5 or 10 together now. And I was like, oh my God.
Well, we're such a small thing.
Yes. I was like, I love you, Greg. And he was like, see? And I was like, oh, I mean, it just made my week. And I came home and I told my husband, he's like, great. I mean, he was like unsupportive. He's like, that's fantastic. And he doesn't like organize exercise whatsoever. He'd rather like beat himself up doing labor. So
yeah. Well, it's like I told you, is like on the phone, is like after some episodes, I'm just so pumped. And not everyone gets that. I've called friends. I'd be like, you never guess who I just talked to. And they're like,
yay.
What's the big deal? Like, so I think that there's just things in life that it's so personal to us that we just got to relish in our own joy from them, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, people, whether it's been artwork or riding horses or CrossFit or whatever, I mean, people always say, I can never do that. And my answer is like, of course you can.
Yeah.
Everybody can do anything. Like, people talk about art and I'm like, oh, you know, I could never do that. I'm like, look, it's just learning. It's a skill. It's a new skill. And you apply some of your own like flair to it, and that's art. And some people are better than others, and you can become better at it. But anybody can do anything they want. And, you know, I don't know.
Put the phone down, pick up the paintbrush.
That's right. Yeah. Or you can pick up the phone to call somebody, to talk to them on the phone. Or go have coffee with them. Yeah, I know. Nobody talks on the phone anymore, really. Including me sometimes. But
I mean, maybe sometimes too.
Yeah.
But.
So it's interesting. Have you noticed, though, like, I don't know, when you talk on the phone ever, do you ever hold the phone up to your head anymore? Because I hate doing that now. I only want to use my AirPods.
I love doing that.
Holding the phone?
Yep.
Wow.
Especially for my day job. A lot of those phone calls, part of it is I feel like I'm doing a service to them because I want them to have a really clear I want them to be able to hear me.
Okay.
And sometimes AirPods, God forbid me for saying this, are not perfect. And they'll be like, oh, there's an echo in the room. And so I just switch over. But I guess that's my old school thing.
You are. Look at you.
Yeah.
A purist. I like
Thank
it.
you.
That's good to know.
Yeah. No, and when I was talking with you, pretty sure, yeah, I had you on the phone here
Okay.
almost the entire call.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I think maybe it's my ADHD. Like I have to, the earpods help me focus, especially if I'm in a strange place or something like that, and I can kind of like put my head down and just listen. And I don't know.
I think that's 90% of the reason I like these.
Yeah.
It helps me just, we're here and it's just us.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So my next guest, final question for you,
Sure.
he is a young man of, I think, somewhere between 20 and 22, currently a marketing student at the University of Texas. And what's really interesting about him is he opened his own digital marketing business about 4 years, and he has, I think, somewhere north of 10 employees, fully employed.
Wow.
I'm very impressed that he's juggling this while also going to school full time. But if you could sit down and pose a question to him, what do you think you'd want to know? Okay, cool. I'll ask him all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Anything else that you want to talk about today, Stephanie?
No, just so much promise for the new generation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would just, life doesn't have to be perfect. You know, just try hard and be kind to yourself first and foremost, but to others around you as well.
I love that. We need some more kindness around here. One of my buddies told me recently, I gave him a compliment on something, and he sort of like jokingly made a self-deprecating joke, and then he also openly admitted to me, he's like, sorry, I need to get better at that because I'm just not used to getting compliments from really anybody. But yeah, just that be kind. It's simple, and like we've said a couple times today, maybe a little cliche, but if you see a friend or someone in the gym or like somewhere where it's appropriate just to pay a compliment, pay it. It could mean the world to that person and really make their day.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And sometimes when people are frustrated or short-tempered or what have you, something is typically driving that has nothing to do with you. So sometimes if you can get them to slow down a little bit, you know, and talk about things, that can go a long way.
Yeah. Well, let's get you out of here. But before we go, I would like to ask everyone that if you either listen to this episode on Spotify, please give us a 5-star review if you enjoyed it. And hopefully, if you listen to an entire 2-hour-long podcast,
Wow.
you enjoyed it.
Fast.
It flies by. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts today, please go to David Saturday Night Sit Back homepage, scroll to the very bottom, and there's a place where you can leave a 5-star review and also leave a comment. If you want to leave one for Stephanie, I'll pass it on to her. If you want to leave one for me, it would make my day. And then last, if you're watching on YouTube and wanted to subscribe to the channel, it helps a ton and it means the world to me so that we can make sure that Stephanie's story makes it to as many mothers as possible who are currently hitting those bumps and need this light and encouragement in their day. So please help us get to them. Outside of that, most important announcement is it is Sydney's birthday. So if you listened, I mean, by the time this airs, it'll be 2 weeks past, give or take. But if you forgot to remind her happy birthday or say happy, you can now don't text, call Sydney, apologize for being 2 weeks late, and wish her a happy birthday.
Boy. Happy birthday, Sid.
Happy birthday, Sydney. All right, everyone. Well, have a beautiful Saturday night. Stay healthy, stay happy, and we will see you next week for another episode. Bye, everybody.